Hello, folks. Hopefully, I'm live and you guys can hear me loud and clear. Do let me know in the chat if you're there and if you can hear me and if I am live. We're going to be talking today on this GW Book Club live stream about Ian Watson's Harlequin. So, the second book in Ian Watson's Inquisitor trilogy. More than a trilogy, really, because it turns out, and I didn't know this going in, but it turns out that Ian Watson's Space Marine book is also super relevant and plays a key part. So really, this is I forget what the term is, quadrilogy. I think that was a made-up term, so I forget what the official term is for 4-part sagas. And there's the short story as well. The Alien Beast Within, that is a precursor to this, and I think maybe even Warped Stars included Grimm, if I remember correctly. So there's loads of parts to this, they're all connected across Ian Watson's oeuvre in the 40k universe, and what what a collection of stories it is. Really wild stuff, I would say. We're going to talk a bit about the story itself, Ian Watson's approach to the 40k universe, just generally what I got out of this story and the sort of continuing saga that he's telling, the story he's telling with his books in 40k. I'll be honest, this was not my favourite of the GW books or the Box Tree books. I think I struggled a little bit with this one. It was a little bit difficult at times to get through, but there is some really interesting stuff here. I'm glad I've read it, so we'll get into all of that. I think we should probably start with just a moment to remember Ian Watson. He very sadly passed away recently, just a week or two ago. Obviously, he's so much more than just his work with Games Workshop. That is what I know him for. But he obviously is a successful writer. He'd written an awful lot of stuff. He lived a long and full life. I think it's always, you don't want to reduce someone to just the sort of body of work, and especially when it's just a small part of their body of work. But that's all I can really talk about, because I've not explored his wider work, and I've not explored any of that sort of wider stuff. So for me, like, my relationship with Ian Watson is through these books. He's had a long shadow in 40k, and he's always been present as the sort of, the early storyteller in 40k's history, the person who wrote those first books, who explored the universe in fiction beyond the rule books. The first person to do that. So that's always been his sort of reputation for me. Obviously, there are tales, and sort of some of them I'm sure apocryphal, a lot of outlandish stuff, grounded and rooted within his work and his way of writing, and what the games he loved to play with his writing and with his readers. I think he had a lot of fun, and that has contributed to his legend as well. But yeah, it's a sad thing. I'm very pleased that I got to speak to him a year or two ago and interview him about his work, and we had a great chat, and he was magnetic. He was such a great personality to speak with. He had so many fun stories. He was really bringing them to life. He's a great storyteller. I mean, that's literally true. And yeah, he was very funny and really warm and really engaging. So for that brief, very, very brief moment that I interacted with him, terrific. Just a terrific person to speak with. So much fun, and he was clearly having fun as well. So yeah, it was really, that was a lovely experience for me. I think it was a great interview. I think he brought so much insight and so much fun stuff to light in that conversation. And now reading his books, getting a sort of a deeper understanding of how he approached 40k, I think, there are things that I don't get on with from these books, but there are a lot of ideas here and a really brave attempt to do some some fun sci-fi storytelling in a way that we never have really seen again, for better and for worse. So I think that, Watson is very well remembered, and yeah, it's a tragic loss, as these things often are. So I just wanted to start by exploring that a little bit. But yeah, Harlequin, we're going to get into it. I would be doing, as an author, I think criticism is part of that world, and constructive and sort of artistic criticism. So I'm not going to sugarcoat my feelings about this book. I'm going to get into it and I'm going to explore it, because I think I'd be doing a disservice to Ian Watson otherwise. So we're going to get into that. I do want to say, Kevin, hello, welcome in. Anvil, welcome in. Sorry that you had to reload. It's very strange, I find, YouTube, when it actually loads stuff up. It can be a bit odd. But yes, hopefully I am live and you've heard everything I've been saying. So please let me know in the chat if I've just been talking to myself for the last 5 minutes, or if all of that has come through. Hopefully that's come through and you've heard all that. And then we can get into the Harlequin of it all, which, an interesting book, certainly, but one that I have really struggled to get through, to be honest. It's taken me a while. So, Kevin, great. Thank you. I'm glad that you heard that. That's all good. So, yeah, Harlequin, it's the second story in the Inquisitor trilogy. It picks up 100 years after the events of the first book. So, in that novel, we basically our Inquisitor hero, Jack Draco. Thank you very much. Glad that you can hear the Vox. Jack Draco and his sort of band of misfits. So he's got Melindy, the Calidus assassin. He's got Grim, the squat engineer, and he's got Vitaly Google, the navigator. And they have been on this adventure. They've encountered this chap, Zephyro Carnelian, who is the Harlequin man, who is actually human, but he has revealed to Jack that there is a conspiracy within the Inquisition that is going to try and release this weird alien creature that may or may not be chaotic, this Hydra, that will spread forth through the galaxy and mind control everyone, and then just make sort of it easier to control the universe and to prevent chaos, because you can wipe everybody out like psychically and all that sort of stuff. So there's this big conspiracy going on. Jack Draco has gone to see the Emperor. The Emperor may or may not have spoken to him, and then they've escaped off of Terra into cryosleep for 100 years, except for Grim the Squat. So you get like a really odd opening. I mean, actually quite cool opening, where you sort of get this it sets up that this book is going to be about, in the first chapter or two, you get the sense that this book is going to be a murder mystery about someone who is assassinating Inquisitors across the galaxy. And I thought that sounded really cool. And Jack Draco was going to come back into this 100 years later, and there's going to be assassinations of Inquisitors taking place. We're going to be investigating that, tracking this down, and trying to put an end to it, whilst also unraveling some of this inquisitorial Hydra sort of, shadow conspiracy. But that murder mystery kind of fades into the background quite quickly, and instead we get Jack Draco sort of milling about for a while, re-recruiting his team, because the navigator, Gogol, dies super early, kind of without ceremony. And then you go on a side tangent regarding Melindy and her assassin capabilities, and then we get involved in a bizarre sort of mission to go against the Eldar, who are building a space station around Stalinvest, which was the planet that was exterminated by accident in the previous, by revenge really, but Jack didn't intend for it to happen. His astropath sent the order that he did not want to send to commit the exterminators on Stalinverse, the planet, wiped everybody out, and now the Eldar are there. What they plan to do there, we do not know, but Jack sort of inserts himself into this narrative, and then we get a long a long period of events on the Eldar space station and then into the Webway. Apparently, ultimately, in search of the Black Library, which is interesting, sort of as a narrative. So you kind of, I felt that this story, it didn't feel to me like it knew where it was going for a very long time. And then when it decided where it was going, it kind of wasn't the most interesting place that I wanted it to go. So I was kind of on the back foot with it for most of the book. There are in here, as within Inquisitor, as within Space Marine, there are some really cool things in here. Some great bits of writing, some really interesting science fiction ideas, some cool world building as well. But as a whole, I didn't feel very much like this one held together particularly well. Like, it felt like it was a bit all over the place, really. And that was, there's lots of reasons for that. Whether or not it is the characterization within this story. So, like, the conversations between Jack and Melindy and Grimm, in particular, are all really strange and short and clipped. And you kind of get the idea that Grimm is supposed to be the sort of comic relief, but everyone hates him. He acts really strange through most of the book. And Jack is kind of suspicious of him for a number of reasons. Mostly, I think, because he's an abhuman, because he's a squad. So you get this really weird dynamic between Grimm and everybody else, where it kind of feels like everybody hates him and doesn't want him to be around. And he also has no redeeming features, but he is around the whole time. And he does a couple of things that, he has a few bits of utility. But that kind of sets up a weird thing, to me, at least. So you've already got these weird dynamics. You've still got Jack kind of lusting after his Calidus assassin, Melindy. So there's this odd kind of dynamic between those two, which in this book I think actually gets a bit more interesting. Actually, I will give him that. Like Watson, I think, takes that to a slightly more interesting place. So you kind of get into this repressed love story between two broken people whose entire lives have sort of been broken on the anvil of service to the Emperor and him on Earth. So that's quite interesting. So having this love story between these two characters who cannot love, that's a cool way to go. You still have the problem of, like, every other male character is, like, lusting after Melindy the entire time, but at least there's more to their relationship, and Melindy seems to have a bit more. She doesn't have very much dialogue in this book. She doesn't do an awful lot in this book, but you get certain things of, like, her choice to stay with Jack and her choice to make sacrifices for him that do speak to her having real feelings for him and there being a real sort of love story happening there. Anvil, it's been a while since I finished. I see what you're saying. I did like how it's not just a trivial thing to get going again when they re-enter the world after stasis, so to speak. Yes, I will agree with that, actually. As despite me saying that it takes a while for this story to get going, and that's a sort of plot thing. I think the book struggles. It doesn't feel like there is a clear plot to the book for a very long, like, chunk of it. But I do agree that actually it's quite interesting to say, okay, you're in stasis for 100 years. You're drifting in space. There's some really cool stuff, like with the fuel that they've got and with how the Astronomicon works and how they can move around the galaxy and where they need to go in order to do things. So I quite like that. That's quite an interesting way of, like, it really grounds things. They can't just, like, fire up the engines and they're darting around the universe to wherever they need to go. They kind of have to think about it and make choices and sacrifices. That's really good. I think it's a bit undermined by, like, the way they can just get a new astropath and a new navigator, and then they can die as well. And they're a bit disposable in a way, which kind of speaks to the universe as a whole. I guess they would be disposable, like they're literally just resources. But it also makes it harder to care about some of the characters and some of the narrative when they are so disposable as characters, I guess. But yeah, I think there's some really cool stuff, and that's the reason that I think this book overall is interesting, despite my difficulties with it, because there are ideas and there is storytelling in here that's really cool and world building that's really cool and interesting. You like Anvil, you like the justified paranoia they have towards Grimm and the Navigator in particular, but also more generally. I agree. Yeah, again, I think that that's totally fine. There were times when I found myself getting a bit annoyed at Jack, in particular around the way he treats Grimm, because it seems so self-defeating. Like, it's fair that he's suspicious of Grimm, and we'll talk more about how Grimm comes to be around at all in a moment. But yeah, it's fair that he's suspicious of Grimm and has that paranoia. But he's kind of adding more fuel to the fire and kind of creating even more difficulties for himself by alienating Grimm throughout and kind of making things a bit more strained between them. Now, Grimm never actually rises to this, which is good. But it kind of is a bit odd to me. Like, Jack doesn't seem like the sort of smartest detective or the coolest mind when it comes to strategy or tactics or like engaging with the world around him. He's kind of bullheaded and kind of just goes in his own direction, whether that's sensible or not, and whether it's dangerous or not, and whether it will put everyone around him in danger or not. So, like, I mean, I guess that's an interesting character trait. An Inquisitor who is just a bit, for want of a better word, a bit stupid, who isn't making the best choices throughout, who is being manipulated and allowing himself to be manipulated. Slogonics. I remember being completely enthralled by the Harlequins when I saw them in White Dwarf in 1988, but also completely baffled by them. Yeah, and I think this book is a little bit baffled by the Harlequins and by the Eldar. There's a real sense of Ian Watson has been sent the latest batch of writing about the Eldar, and he just includes a lot of it, like sort of straight out of what would be the first Eldar Codex. Like, there's a lot of stuff in here that's very clearly like, okay, so they have this unit and it does this. They have that weapon and it does that. So there's a lot of that later on that's a bit too much like a catalogue, a bit too much like an army list, I suppose. I didn't really know anything about 40k at the time, so couldn't figure out what the Eldar were. Were they the good guys or the bad guys? I quite like that, though, Slugonics. I like the fact that the Eldar are quite alien in their agendas and whatever they're up to. One of the things I really enjoyed, so you get a very brief sort of mention of Eldrad Ulthron, and I really like him as a character. I've really enjoyed him over the years, and I love the sort of conceptual idea of this guy, this alien figure who is so powerful and can see the future and can sort of see the time streams, that he would, like, I can't remember the particular story, but like, it's about, he redirects like an Orc War or a Tyranid invasion ever so slightly so that it avoids like an Eldar ship of however many hundred or however many thousand souls, and it instead goes towards a human planet that has a billion people on it. And that's just how the Eldar think. They will nudge things ever so slightly, throw a pebble into the water to change the way the stream will flow, even if that will have enormous negative ramifications for everybody else. As long as it protects the Eldar, then it's the right choice. Like the ultimate form of the ends justify the means, where the ends are protecting Eldar souls. And they'll do anything to do that. Like, I really like that idea, and there's elements of that in here that are quite cool. I actually quite like that you all, even by the end of this book, have no idea what the Eldar are doing, really. There's a lot of like back and forth over this weird prophecy about the Emperor's sons and what they're about, and the Eldar may or may not be trying to summon a new Chaos God or a new human god, which I think is quite interesting. So there's cool stuff in here, and I like that the Eldar are both good guys and bad guys, depending on your perspective. And I still think that's one of the coolest things about the Eldar. Anvil, regarding Jack's competency or lack thereof, I think most or all of Harlequin and the first few chapters of Chaos Child, at least, feel kind of like he's having a fever dream. Yeah, I mean, and you could put some of that down to he's just come out of stasis after 100 years. You could also put some of it down to like he's been stripped of his inquisitorial rank and responsibilities. He's on the lam for the first time. So there's a lot of stuff where you could be like, yeah, he's not going to be operating at 100%. I think part of my issues here is that it never quite makes sense to me what he's trying to achieve most of the time. And he seems to achieve stuff mostly by luck. And yeah, but to what end is kind of unknown. Now, whether or not he's being manipulated by Zephyr Carnelian and by the Harlequins and by the Eldar or by the Inquisitors, that's quite cool. I think I would find it more interesting if he's being manipulated by these external forces and he's quite clever, but he's kind of been buffeted about a little bit, lacking a bit of agency. I mean, I've talked before about some of the adventures that take place in GW books and where characters lack agency, and I personally don't find that interesting. And I'm gonna say something controversial here that may ruffle a few feathers. So I felt that whilst reading Harlequin, it felt kind of like we were heading back towards Conrad territory for like Conrad's book 2 and 3. There are a lot of sections of Harlequin where Watson reminds us of things that have just happened. So every time he brings up like Stalinvast, he will remind us that Jack accidentally caused it to be Exterminatus. Every time Vitaly Gogol comes up, we're reminded that he just died and Jack feels bad about it. Like, we're constantly reminded of things that have literally taken place. Kind of feels a little bit like a way to pad out some of the page count again. You know, there's elements of it where I don't need to know yet again this same detail. You don't need to tell me what happened between Melindi and Zephyr Carnelian. Like, it comes up 2 or 3 times. It can come up just once because we can remind us in this story, but you bring it up again and again, and it just kind of replays stuff. And there's a lot of that floating around. I felt. So yeah, Anvil, harsh words certainly. Maybe I've gone too far. Zingbo, I can imagine Ian Watson deliberately undermining the idea of super competent Inquisitor and of the Imperium being effective in any way, really. Yeah, and you know what? Actually, the way in which the Inquisition and the Imperium work, I really like in this book because they don't work, and I think that this is a more interesting, to me at least, version of the Imperium, because you're really getting that version of the Imperium that is just stumbling over itself all the time because it's no one knows what happens. It's labyrinthine bureaucracy. It's religious extremism. It is nonsense on top of nonsense. Impossible to actually work out anything. Orders going all over the place. Who's really doing what? Whether the Emperor is really there. Like, all of these things are in question, and it feels this is the very Terry Gilliam-esque version of the Imperium that doesn't really exist anymore. At least I don't tend to see it as much. Where it's messy and it's dirty and it's bureaucratic, and not just aesthetically. I think you still see that aesthetically now, but like in an actual way that doesn't make sense because they're doing things that don't make sense because they're inept, and even individuals who are competent are operating within a system that is totally broken, and it's impossible to actually achieve anything proper. Again, it's also like the Douglas Adams Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Like, it's a version of bureaucracy where things are so outlandishly over the top that they work, sort of, but really they don't work, and you can end up doing paperwork for a millennia in order to approve something. So yeah, that does work. I just wish that Jack within that was a little bit more capable, or that the story made us understand that he's not as capable for a specific reason, like the stasis or whatever else, his emotional state. Whereas I just think it just isn't that competent, ultimately. Anvil, can you imagine if humans would act that way, like those selfish Eldar? Imagine. Yeah, I mean, I think the way in which the Eldar represent a version of humanity has always been an interesting part of 40k as well. You know, and they're like humanity's a certain type of human thinking, which I think is interesting. Zingbo, it's been ages since I read Chaos Child, but I remember Jack's motivations and direction did seem to be pretty hard to follow, especially compared to Inquisitor, where it was pretty straightforward. Yeah, and I'll be interested to see where things go in Chaos Child, given what occurs in this book and where we end up with Jack in this book. But let's talk about Grimm for a second. So, Grimm has just been out and about for 100 years. So whilst Jack and Melindy and Google are in stasis, Grimm is just sort of working his way across the universe. There's a kind of cool little bit of like explanation of how he managed to get off of Earth, where he's been working, what he's been doing. And then we kind of later on get this idea that he has been contacted by Zephyro Carnelian, the Harlequin man, and sort of has like believes the conspiracies that he's been told by Zephyro. He is now fully believing in this kind of prophecy that the Emperor has had countless children across the galaxy before he was consigned to the Golden Throne. And those children are being recruited to become the Illuminati in order to be a special unit of knights who will be able to help the Emperor essentially be reborn Starchild style as the new men, which later on, which obviously, and I don't know where it comes from, the word new men, so Numen. Later on, someone in the book is like, new men for the new men, as in Numen for the NEW men. And it's just such an odd play on words because it's so immediately obvious to then have someone else say it out loud. It doesn't come across as clever. It comes across as just a bit easy, lazy, dare I say. But yeah, the new men, I can't remember this being anywhere else. Correct me if this is, like, I don't remember this, if this is into Slaves to Darkness or anything else. But it's this kind of, like, weird prophecy that doesn't quite make sense, which I'm in favor of. I think prophecies can kind of be pretty cool when they don't really make any sense. And you have to interpret it yourself. And in this, the interpretation that the Eldar have and that Zephyro Carnelian has is that there is some kind of like deification that is possible. Okay, Anvil. Numen is Latin for a divine power, I think. Okay, well that would certainly make sense. But yeah, there is this potential for the Emperor to be reborn as a god who may or may not be like the equivalent of the Chaos Gods, but for humans. Or he could actually be like a fifth Chaos God. So the Eldar have decided that they want to have a load of sacrifices in order to cause this to happen that would then result in the creation of this god, and that they could trap it and then they could kill it, which is kind of cool. Anvil, there's some old document about the 40k setting that I think includes the idea of the Numen, definitely includes the Sons of the Emperor and the Illuminati. Right, yes, okay, so is that there is the Nature of Chaos primer that Rick Priestley wrote. Maybe they're in there and I've forgotten about them. I mean, that would certainly make sense. I also, just taking your note before, I don't remember having, so I think this is when I was talking about it being somewhat Conrad-esque. It's not nearly as bad as Conrad 2. I don't think it is. I know, I agree. I don't think Harlequin is as bad as Conrad 2. But yeah, I think that it is on that journey that Conrad 2 was on, for want of a better way of phrasing that. It just is a bit stodgy, this book. Like, I struggled to get through it. It was really, like, it was at times a bit like sort of wading through treacle. And I think part of that was because it wasn't clear where we were going. And it wasn't clear that the characters knew where they were going either. So me and the characters are all just sort of floundering about in our treacle, like not sure which direction to go. So there were chapters in this book where I've really had to sort of force myself to kind of plod on through it. And that, that's obviously sounds really bad, and that's not great for any book. It just, yeah, I don't want to like slate it, because it's not a bad book. I don't think there are interesting things here. Slug, there's so many weird bits in Warhammer lore from the old days, stuff that they've had to reconcile in weird ways as the IP became more commercial. Yeah. I mean, you're dead right. You're dead right. And this book, one of the things I quite like about this book is so much of it's so odd and so specific that I think you could argue that this could all be a fever dream that Jack was having. This is a rogue Inquisitor who may or may not have been corrupted by chaos. He's constantly talking about, like, am I going to be possessed by a demon? He thinks that this Harlequin man is running around sort of directing things. He's now got these conspiracy theories about the Emperor, about the Inquisition. This could just be a guy who's gone off the deep end because of all of this stuff he's seen, and just like is reshaping his own narrative, and we're seeing it from his perspective, and none of this is real. So I think there is a potentially interesting read on that, and I think I probably will choose to read it that way unless there's some definitive things that happen. But there's even the way other characters interact with Jack and choices they make are just very strange. Slug, how this IP became so commercial given its inherent weirdness, tone, and social commentary is another whole conversation. I agree, and I think part of the reason it became so commercial is because they shed a lot of this kind of stuff. There are weird, thorny, grimy, murky puddles of ideas in here that are really interesting, but are very hard to get your arms around, and are not always executed especially well. I think there are great things to mine here, and I think it's very interesting, and it's probably the most compelling thing that makes me want to read like the Siege of Terror or any of the sort of later stuff with the Illuminati and the Hydra, and how all of that is sort of reshaped and reimagined post Watson. Like, there's an interesting thing there that I quite like, the idea that is like, how would a more modern writer tackle some of these ideas and bring them to the modern 40k universe? So like that is compelling to me and does make me want to consider that. But I know that they're quite far through the Horus Heresy, so I can't imagine doing it anytime soon. Amble, I think part of the difference for me between Harlequin and Conrad 2 is that in Harlequin, I think it quite works to reinforce Jack's state of mind and his various obsessions. I don't think it really does the same in Conrad. Perhaps a difference in execution, or maybe I was less positively inclined towards Conrad. No, I agree with you. I think you're right. I think even with the similarities in like rudderlessness, Conrad 2 always felt like it was a succession of events. There were cool moments for me in Conrad 2, but it always felt like it was just, okay, what's next? What's next? What's next? What's next? None of it felt like a continuing thing. And that meant that the character of Conrad was kind of bounced about from these things. It's way more connected here. There are much more interesting character dynamics and arcs here, even if at times they're like all over the place and they kind of lose like coherency, I would say. But there are some really cool bits in this that I'm going to come back to in a second. Richard, hello, welcome in. With all three of these, it seems like to be trying to get to everything from the universe in there somewhere, so it feels just disjointed, a little like Conrad. Yes, sorry. So, yeah, all three of the Inquisitor books, they definitely are like, I'm going to grab this, I'm going to grab that, I'm going to grab the others. 100%. I think that there is a real attempt to like just reference as much stuff as possible that exists in the formal fiction, in the formal books, like the rule books and the codex books and all that kind of stuff. Well, the codex books is just, starting to, or about to come into being. So there's a huge thing about like, let's just grab things that we know exist and try and explain them together. So you get like the breakdown of all of the different aspect warriors of the Eldar, for instance, because they've now been defined. So we're going to make sure that they're all in here and their definitions are clear. It's actually a really interesting example of what the Black Library, I think, would later do, like, as standard, where, like, you know, if you're going to include that army, then you want to include the actual units that you can buy, because it's an advert for those units. And I think this is quite a clear example of that for the Eldar. Oddly enough, the Harlequins are barely relevant, barely present. It's Aspect Warriors more than it's Harlequins, which is really interesting because it makes me question, and this is pure supposition on my part, I wonder if the Harlequin man, Zephyro Carnelian, in the previous book, because there's no real reference to Harlequins in the previous book, if he is just he was another dude. He's a character who has nothing to do with Harlequins, but Harlequin is a cool word, and it makes sense for the weirdness that was Zephyro Carnelian, who is somewhat Michael Moorcockian in style. And whether or not that was just Ian Watson just creating a character who was quite cool, and then coming to this book, oh, there's actually a thing called Harlequins in this universe as well. Why don't I tie them together? Now, that could be me being, like, ungenerous, but it doesn't feel like a natural fit to me to have Zephyro Carnelian, who dresses like an Earth Harlequin, then happens to be, and is referred to as the Harlequin man because of that, then happens to also be in a conspiracy with the actual Harlequins of the Eldar. That's an odd coincidence. And then if it's not a coincidence, that means that Zephyro Carnelian, who knows the Harlequins, knows they're called the Harlequins, knows how the Harlequins dress, then decides, rather than dressing like them, he's going to dress like a Harlequin from Earth's history 30,000, 40,000 years earlier. Does that make sense? I don't know if I've made any sense there. But basically, it seems like a weird coincidence for both versions of the Harlequin to be present in this book. And that's not a problem. It's just a weird moment. Just a weird choice, I guess, is all I mean. Zingbo, Lost in the Dams makes reference to the Emperor as the new man and the prophesied return of said new man. Yeah, so this follows on from Star Child stuff, right? And the Emperor's kids called the Sensei yet in this. Yes, they are the Sensei Knights. Which, yeah, it's kind of... I mean, I don't know who came up with that term, but that's kind of an interesting term in and of itself, and like what it means. Anvil, maybe I missed something. I thought Zephyro was aping the Eldar Harlequins. Yeah, he is, but if memory serves, there's a piece of art in the first book, Inquisitor, where he is dressed literally like an Earth Harlequin with an Earth Harlequin hat on. So he's like dressed in the Commedia dell'arte Harlequin from like the Italian Renaissance with the full on hat, which is not something that the Eldar Harlequins wear. So he's aping the Eldar Harlequins by dressing like a human Harlequin, which, yeah, you could be like, oh well, he's honoring his human heritage, but like it's 40,000 years later, so how does he even know that they're a thing? How do they even exist? So like, all I mean is, and like I say, this is very trivial, nitpicky stuff. But if he's aping the Eldar Harlequins, why isn't he dressed like an Eldar Harlequin? Why is he dressed like a human Harlequin? That's all I mean. It's just very strange. It's very strange. So his nickname, the Harlequin Man, doesn't seem to refer to the Eldar Harlequins. It refers to the human Harlequins, which is weird to me, in the context of a universe where the Eldar Harlequins exist. But I admit I'm nitpicking. I'm nitpicking there. So let's talk about something very cool. Richard, yes, the Sean Connery picture, that is the one. I'm pretty certain, and I could be wrong, I've not got the book to hand, I'm pretty certain that Zephyro looks like a human Harlequin in that picture. But something I think that is super, super cool in this book, I really love it, and it's criminally underused in this book, is the story of Melindi and her surgeon, the Calidus like master surgeon who, in the previous story, in the Alien Beast Within, he had done surgery on her to basically change her ability to polymorph into any alien by adding in certain like chambers and things within her body that would allow her to better replicate a gene stealer hybrid, which for whatever reason you couldn't just polymorph into naturally. So that was not within the power of the Calidus assassins. But by doing that, she could only change into a gene stealer hybrid. She lost the ability to turn into anything else, which it's kind of interesting, kind of a cool sort of setup for a thing. And she's lost that main power. Kind of seemed like it would have been permanent. I think it was even described as permanent. But conveniently, in this book, it is not permanent, so that's going to help us out. So I think there's a bit of like author, like it's kind of a fait accompli of just you can reverse it, it's fine. But that arbitrary choice gives us the great gift that is Tarek Aziz, who is the Calidus surgeon who has gone rogue because of these wild experiments that he's been doing, and he has run off. And he's on his own planet in the middle of nowhere with his own kind of like base full of whatevers, there's kind of rogue weirdos being hunted by the Calidus, and he has sealed himself away in a dreadnought body. It's super cool. I just think it's really, really cool. It's like probably to me the most Star Wars-y that 40k has ever been. Like, it feels like, I forget the name of Forrest Whitaker's character in the more recent Star Wars timeline, where he is like this rebel out in the middle of nowhere before the rebellion really exists yet, and he's kind of in some sort of dusty fort out in the desert on a planet, and you have to go in there, and it's weird. It's like going into Jabba's palace. There's this really cool stuff where they've got to go into this they've got to find the Calidus, like this rogue Calidus surgeon, and recruit him to do the experiment, the surgery back on Melindy, and then you don't know if he's going to try and kill her while she's under like anesthesia. There is another Calidus assassin there who's also looking for something, who tries to warn her, but she kills him. It's just really cool stuff. It's only a chapter or two, but it was like, this is great. Why is this not the whole book? I don't need all of these world universe spanning conspiracies and new men and whatever else. Like, cool stuff in the corners, on the fringes of the 40k universe. And you're using the 40k stuff in a really interesting way. A stolen dreadnought that is being used to protect a rogue Calidus guy from the rest of the assassin. The whole temple are out to kill him. I think it's cool. I think it's very cool. I think it's a shame that it did not take up more of this book. There's a possibility it will turn up in Chaos Child. I suspect it might. If it doesn't, I'll be doubly disappointed. But yeah, I thought it was very cool to have that whole Tarek Aziz thing. Just really cool. Just a neat set of ideas that serves a purpose, quite an arbitrary purpose in the plot, but does so in a really fun way. Anvil, how can I think of cool stuff while he on Earth is being tortured? Very true. Yeah, I mean but that's why I would be a heretic in the 40k universe, because I'm like, that's cool. Dreadnoughts are cool. Anvil, I thought it was a very cool idea how one of them in stasis was frozen in the moment of an uncomfortable event or thought or whatever it was, meaning he was sort of tortured by it. Yes, that is interesting. But then that's kind of squandered. It's thrown away. So you have this really interesting idea that Google has had a tormented 100 years nightmare, and then I actually forget the specifics of how he dies. But then he dies like super quick, so they never really have to deal with it. You kind of have this initial thing of like, well, how are we going to go into the warp when Google is like completely terrorized by his fears and his paranoia and his nightmares. So you then get into this place where, okay, well, where is that going to go next? Oh, he's dead. because it's kind of too complex and too difficult. It kind of takes us off the path. But that's a cooler path to travel. So I thought it was a shame that he died. And then he's replaced by a new astropath and a new navigator who themselves have a really interesting sort of very micro story, like of what their relationship is. And they get really close. And is theirs a love story? Or is it sort of a brotherhood? Or what's going on between the two of them? And then they both die as well. And it's these kind of very cool moments, cool ideas that are like squandered too often, for me at least. And we spend way too long with Grimm, who is not a funny comedic character, with Jack, who is just a bit of a failure of an Inquisitor, and with Melindy, who doesn't get to say very much and is constantly being sort of leered at, again by Space Marines this time though. Zephyro found some DC comics stashed away by the Remembrances somewhere. Okay. To explain his Harlequin costume. Zingbo, I wonder how much of the need to include so much of the 40k background was editorial diktat rather than Ian Watson wanting to include them all. Yeah, I mean, maybe. I think one of the things, and again, I don't want to be ungenerous, but given how vast sections of the end of this book or later on stages of this book really do just describe entries from the army list, it does make me wonder how much of that was we can get a load of pages really quickly here by just saying here's a swooping hawk and here's what a swooping hawk does and here's something else, and it's probably unfair to say, but it did feel like there was just a bit too much extended exploration or explanation of that kind of stuff, in my opinion. I don't really agree that Gogol thing was squandered. He was semi-corrupted by Slaanesh, and that got him killed by a demonette. Oh, yes, it was a demonette. You're quite right. Fairly early on in the book, but I thought that was okay. Yeah, maybe I'm being a bit precious. And yeah, I mean, that's fine. I think part of that, the fact that the Slaanesh turned up, the Slaanesh demons turned up in that fight on that planet, it all felt a little bit easy, I think. They kind of went to the first planet they could, and then it happened to be a planet that had Slaanesh demons on again, and then because that was who, what had tortured Gogol in his sort of stasis nightmare, because they'd encountered them previously on the planet in the Eye of Terror. It's all the dots connected very, very easily for him to be killed. Maybe that's what I mean. So maybe squandered is too harsh, but it just didn't feel satisfying to me. You're right, though. Killing him off, that could set you up for some interesting stuff, but I don't think the reactions to them were quite interesting enough. The reactions to his death were not interesting enough. And then the introduction of the new astropath and the new navigator, which does open the door to some cool stuff as well, is also that they die by the end. They're a bit red shirty. They kind of feel a bit Star Trek red shirts. They're going to die because they're the tools. They're not real people. And again, maybe that's good in terms of 40k storytelling because of how horrible and utilitarian and that the whole thing is about this person exists and their value exists only to power a spaceship. And when they are no longer able to do that, they're worthless. So maybe there is something in that, which is a thing. But yeah, I think you're right. Slaanesh seems like the only Chaos God in early Warhammer fiction. I think because it was the hot new thing, right? It was kind of cool. In the late 80s, it's kind of cool. It's edgy. It's probably harder to get a handle on a Tzeentch. What are they up to? It's, Khorne is probably a bit boring because it's just killing. And Nurgle, yeah, I mean, there's loads of fun stuff you can do with Nurgle. I think Tzeentch is the best personally, but yeah, I can understand why Slaanesh was attractive to writers during this period. And yeah, Anvil, you're right. We did have a load of Nurgle stuff, certainly in some of the Warhammer fiction, which, didn't always work that well, but it is okay. I don't care about the apocalypse. I just want local stories and character interactions and studies. This is my reaction to sci-fi settings like Destiny and modern Doctor Who. Yeah, I mean, I think, I kind of agree. I kind of agree, actually. Because there are there are times when I want a world-ending threat and I want a big story, but I think another good example would be the MCU and the Marvel movies. Personally, I feel like the later stories, the later films in the MCU are not interesting because the scale is so big. So you kind of escalated and escalated and escalated, and instead of resetting things and kind of saying, right, let's make it intimate, let's make it personal, let's make it meaningful, they just continue to try and escalate. And actually, by making it less personal, they've ended up making it less interesting. And what I want, more often than not always, but more often than not, are stories that are about characters dealing with a thing, and that thing can literally be the death of their weirdo navigator friend who's been killed by a Slaneshi demon, and like that being a big part of their story, instead of just brushing it off and kind of going, right, what are we on to next? So, did anyone else like Tarek Z's the Dreadnought Calidus man? Because I thought that was so cool. I thought it was great, and it's very brief, but it was one of the best sections in the book, I thought. There is one of the results of that, and this is me being picky again. Melindy is an unusual name to start with. One of the results of the fact that Melindy can now shapeshift again is that she becomes an Eldar later on in the story, and I could not for the life of me work out how to pronounce her name. So, like, her Eldar name is Millioned? Mile Ionad. Maybe that's it. That sounds kind of like... Does that sound kind of Welsh, perhaps? Like, there's certain something in that. Millionad. Mile Ionad. Maybe. I don't know. But so, I don't know if anybody else does this, but when I'm reading a book and there is a name that I cannot pronounce, I just kind of shorthand it in my head, because I don't... Like, my brain just doesn't want to deal with trying to pronounce it, even in my own head. I don't want to have to try and pronounce it as I read through it. Melonhead. I don't want to have to try and pronounce it every time. So I just kind of short. So I was like, Mile. Right, that's what I will call this character when I'm reading through. Personally, I don't think she would have needed... Like, I don't think she really tells anybody. Like, she doesn't tell any Eldar what her Eldar name is. I mean, maybe she tells one or two, perhaps. But, like, she's infiltrating... She doesn't necessarily need an Eldar name, but even if she does, we don't need to refer to her by the Eldar name. So I don't know why why Watson felt the need to do that. She could have still just been Melindy, and he could have just told us that she looked like an Eldar now. So I don't know what was driving that. But yeah, you have this weird... I mean, I think I forget who it was who said earlier on. About, like, you could describe a lot of Ian Watson's work as just a bit weird, and yes, I think there are certainly moments in the prose of this where they just where he adds a lot of, like, unnecessary detail that is either not necessarily sexual in nature. But he loves to put a lot of, like, biological stuff in there, and he loves to highlight, like, genitals or parts of the body, or, like, these kind of, like, physical interactions. It's something that he enjoys doing. He said as much to me when I interviewed him, that he just liked to be a little bit salacious, a little bit naughty. It was just part of what he does. And sometimes it's kind of funny when it's in there. Sometimes it's just kind of like, do you need to reference every single time, like, anyone's Space Marine armor comes up? He always has to talk about, like, the Space Marine codpiece and stuff like that. That's just referenced loads of times. Loads of people end up naked just for no reason. So yeah, there's like loads of stuff like that where you don't really need it. Anvil, you like the Calidus Dreadnought, but perhaps not as much as I did. Yeah, I mean, I will admit that was definitely my favourite bit. Zingbo, Tzeentch corruption shows up in Space Marine. It was probably more interesting than the Tyrion stuff that happened later in the book. Yeah, I'm trying to remember the specifics of that sort of. There was like the weird, weird's the wrong word. There was the ritual stuff again where they had to get naked for the ritual where the Space Marines were going to be sacrificed by the Chaos Squats, if memory serves. Yeah, I think was that Tzeentch? Was that a Tzeentchian plot? Anvil, God, these YouTube ads are a pain during streams. Jordan, single-handedly making me reconsider not having a subscription. Oh, goodness me. Don't go, Anvil. Richard, hence the Slanesh as first choice. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. That is completely drives it. Zingbo, is it in Chaos Child where Grimm gets awkwardly obsessed about the status of one part of the Space Marines' anatomy? He does. I'm sure it's alluded to in this book, but maybe that comes back in Chaos Child. It wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me at all. But yeah, there's that kind of strange element. But the mission onto this odd Eldar sort of craft world space station that has been created, you kind of get like it's interesting in the idea that the Eldar are sort of able to build out from Wraithbone this space station super quick is kind of quite cool, and there's an oddity to it, and there's not clear what they're trying to do, and it's in orbit of Stalinverse, which I quite like because that kind of gives all of the stuff that happened in Inquisitor becomes kind of fated, like there's more at work here. Like, you know, is that the kind of thing that the Eldar have manipulated into happening? Like, it could absolutely be that the Eldar have pulled strings. Eldrad has pulled strings for millennia in order to get to the place where Jack will take Mama Parsheen off of the planet Stalinverse, and then she will order exterminators on his behalf so that the planet is completely destroyed, so that they can do this ritual here right now. And I quite like that. That sort of thing definitely plays to me. That's really neat. What I couldn't quite get my head around was some of the when they arrive. So Jack and his team arrive on the space station to infiltrate it. Their plan is that Melindy, as an Eldar, will take them in and will kind of be like, I've arrested these random dudes and I've brought them here for some reason. And then all the Eldar will be okay with this. They arrive, it's definitely going to go wrong. Loads of Eldar turn up and they're going to kill everybody, probably. Then they get called away, luckily, and Melindy's able to take out the two guards that remain, and then they carry on into the space station. But the reason they get called away is because the Imperial Fists have launched a massive attack onto the space station at the same time that this stealth mission takes place. It wasn't clear to me what exactly the stealth mission was supposed to achieve. So they're kind of breaking onto the platform, onto the space station. I don't think at that time that they were trying to find... I think they were trying to find Zephyro Carnelian, perhaps, and they assumed he would be here. But it's quite a bold risk when they had no information to that effect. It was just an assumption that he would be here. So we're going to break onto this massive space station the Eldar have just built, full of Eldar. The Space Marines are on their way. I guess we'll just go in and see what happens. And that's the kind of thing that kind of made me lose... Like, I didn't feel that there was forward momentum because it was just kind of happening. They were just doing it because I guess that's what they were supposed to do next in the book. So they do break on. They encounter a load of the Imperial Fists. Our old friend Baal Ferenz, the Inquisitor from the first book, who has been part of the conspiracy, who set up Jack, who was in this book at the start for the first chapter when it seemed like this book was going to be like an interstellar murder mystery where Inquisitors are being killed off, and it seemed like it was going to be a really interesting story about that, but we just don't hear from him for another 20 chapters, and then he turns up again, but now he can't remember who he is sometimes, and he's sort of like, we need to kill Jack Draco, but also I don't really remember. And then you get a very odd series of events when we actually get Lex de Arquebus, the Space Marine from the novel Space Marine, who is now like a full, I think he's a commander or a lieutenant, I can't remember, but he's full on. He's sort of fully actualized as a Space Marine. He's a captain leading his unit or what have you, and he kind of isn't too sure about Inquisitor Ferenz, and he maybe thinks that Jack might be on the level, so he sort of switches allegiances or kind of is intrigued and follows them off. There's a lot of stuff here that's really arbitrary, where in the midst of a massive battle, in order, like, as the Space Marines are attacking the space station and they've landed and there's loads of Eldar about, loads of Space Marines about, huge fights are happening, and yet somehow Baal Ferenz and Lex and his guys are able to have a full conversation with Jack and Melindy. They're able to like have a little fight. They're able to have another conversation. They're able to run off and do stuff. Yes, I know this is the kind of thing you have to do in a novel. It just didn't seem that elegant to me. Kind of feeling like I wasn't sure where this was happening in relation to this massive battle, but like a full conversation didn't kind of make sense to me in those moments. So ultimately, all of that just is to get you separated from, is to get Lex separated from his men so that he can sort of learn a bit more about Jack and Melindy and Grimm and I think it's Azul Petrov, the navigator. So you kind of have some stuff there where you kind of get like a bit more about. Yeah, I mean, you're right, Zingbo. Jack Draco and his companions have a PC glow about them. I guess I should join their gang. Yeah, there's definitely some arbitrariness there. But he does join the gang. This gives rise to a very cool sequence of events, though, where the Astropath and the Navigator have been getting close to one another. There's this whole thing with the Astropath kind of thinks that when he dies, he will hear every communication from across the universe that's ever happened or ever will happen in one go. And I quite like that. This is like a really interesting kind of like time dilation, the collapse of time and space. It will all occur simultaneously to him. So that's what he thinks. He thinks that's going to be the sort of revelation he gets when he dies. And then when he does die, which happens very quickly, his mate, the Navigator, is devastated by this, but he's going to have a rougher time than that. So he's devastated by this. Later on, he gets a message seemingly from the Astropath from the beyond, like communicating with him and helping him see a rune, an Eldar rune. And because he's got like an eye, a sort of obsidian gem third eye that kills anybody outright if they look at it, onto this physical, like, gem, ruby, whatever it's made of, eye, we get Lex de Arquebus, who we know from his novel loves a good scrimshaw. He loves to carve onto bone. He is able to, through his visor, carve the rune that is kind of manifested briefly on the Navigator's eye. He's able to scrimshander, or whatever it would be, scrimshaw it into the gem in his third eye, so he will permanently be able to see it. And that rune is a permanent, like, beacon that they can follow to the Black Library through the webway. It's so outlandish and so absurd, but so good. Like, it makes perfect use of the weirdness of the Navigator and the third eye. He's explained earlier on that he's got this kind of Medusa thing where he's got this jeweled eye where if you see it, you'll die. So you kind of already got that's already been set up ages ago. We know from the Space Marine novel that Lex loves to like scrimshaw onto his own bones. He's like one of the best scrimshaw carve guys in the Imperial Fists. So it's this really neat way of bringing together these two separate like characters with very specific things in a way that you wouldn't have expected. That is cool and interesting. So, and I need to come up with words other than cool, but it was cool. I thought it was really good. I thought that this is the kind of stuff that Watson does so well. This is the kind of like weird world building where these outlandish, impossible things happen. They're so strange but they make so much sense in the 40k universe, to me at least. Like, they work so well. So he does that. Petrov also gets his arm burnt off, which is pretty rough. So they have to do like an amputation on the fly. So he's having a really rough day. He's going to be blind. He's only ever going to see this rune for like forevermore. He helps them find the Black Library using this. I think Jane Zar might be around. There's certainly some Banshee Exarch floating about. But they make it into the Black Library. There's a cool bit about the fact that Inquisitors are said in the Realm of Chaos book to be able to go into the Black Library. So they kind of explain that a little bit more, and it's quite nice that it's like heresy to even suggest it, but actually it's true, but only because they're like prisoners and stuff. So I quite like that use of that bit of lore. And in the Black Library, there is a text, the Rana Dandra, I think it's pronounced, unless that's the princess from Willow. And there's a terrible joke, even worse than that joke I just made, where Grimm is like, "Oh, the Book of Dandruff," and he says it more than once, and it was not funny the first time. So saying it multiple times does not make it funnier, and does give me sympathy for why Jack hates Grimm. But yeah, there is a really there's this interesting idea of this book that will help them understand what's going on, and then Petrov, who's been through all of this stuff, who's helped them get to the Black Library, whose eye has been blinded by this rune, then sort of succumbs to kind of chaos and temptation, tries to steal the book and the gems that are on the book, so they have to kill him. So like another navigator gone. But what that does mean is that we're left just with... Oh, and I forgot, of course, Melindy is killed by potentially Janzar, or Janzar. And they're really sad about it. And that's when Jack kind of realizes that he might love her. We also get Lex kind of having sort of odd... I think there's an interesting thing around how Lex reacts to Melindy, because he has the sort of repressed urges of a Space Marine. But also, it's like those repressed urges are the sort of unstoppable force and the immovable object. The immovable object is the Space Marine's repressed urges. The unstoppable force is what Ian Watson's need for male characters to lust after Melindy. So those two things have to butt heads, and you kind of get this interesting tension in how Lex is thinking about Melindy that's not quite as lustily as some other characters have, but is definitely sort of, impure in certain ways, I think. But he doesn't really understand it, I think. So that was quite interesting as well. So it was kind of put to good use for a change. Although you then do get a weapon that causes Lex to have to strip off and get down to his boxers. He has to take all of his armor off because it's damaged and what have you. So yeah, there's just unnecessary stuff like that. Other cool stuff that I forgot to mention was that, like, on the planet when they were trying to find a navigator, Grimm has helped a navigator escape, and sort of is this kind of underground railroad sort of situation where a merchant has given shelter to the navigator. Jack turns up with Melindy and Grimm in order to get the navigator, and they literally just kill the merchant. They just kill him outright at the door, even though he's got like a family, even though he was helping with the navigator. That, like, it's kind of brutal, but it does speak to how I think an Inquisitor would work in this universe. Like, they're not good people. The Imperium are not the good guys. No one is a good guy in this. So he wouldn't be sparing people if he doesn't have to, if that makes sense. Like, so I think that does work in this story. It's horrid, but that's because the protagonists are not good guys here. He also kills the governor. There's an interesting moment of like tension about whether or not he's going to be able to get around the governor, because he wants the governor's astropath, who is in a dungeon downstairs. And you have this kind of standoff, this sort of political standoff for a little bit. That's quite cool. But yeah, he does then just kill the governor, kills the concubines, and like damns the planet. And so it's another, and I suppose that again speaks to the sort of pragmatism, the brutal pragmatism of the Inquisitor, is that he has to, by killing the governor on a planet that's already in civil war, he's going to leave the sort of Imperium side of that civil war without a figurehead, and that's probably going to damn the entire planet to rebellion, which is then going to get it killed by the Space Marines and the rest of the Imperium. So it's quite an interesting way to go, well, Jack's seeing he has a higher calling, and he will allow anything to happen. It's very Eldar, I suppose, per your point before, Anvil. It's the kind of thing that the Eldar would do, and the humans do it as well. By the way, I won't say it's completely unearned or implausible, but I do struggle to believe Lex from Space Marine becoming Captain material. Yeah, I mean, I take it that it must be several decades later. I think, for me, part of the problem with Space Marine was that the narrative of Lex becoming the main character isn't that effective. And, yeah, we don't quite get to a place where he has learned the right lessons sufficiently well. I don't think. I can suspend disbelief long enough for him to have overcome those issues by the time of this story, though, because actually this could be 100 years later, I suppose. Ill. Still say cool, but alternate spelling between C and K every time. Okay. Yeah, I mean that's kicking K cool, that's for sure. But yeah, so ultimately, I mean, I've been through a lot of my issues here. Most of them are like kind of petty little issues. Oh, my cat Martha has gotten involved. Oh, let's try this. I don't know if this will work, but let's have a little go, and we'll see if we can get Martha cam. There you go. Is Martha? Hopefully, you guys can all see. She's just come over for a little cuddle. Wants to say hello. But yes, I agree. I think that there is. I agree. I'm agreeing with myself. So apologies, I lost my train of thought. Anvil, yeah, I think we're supposed to believe that Lex's later handling of the deaths of Biff and the other guy made him grow up over the 40 to 60 years, or however long it's been. I think it's 6 long service. Letterland never leaves, as it seems. Yeah, Singvo, Martha's here. Anvil, studs by Harlequin, and they represent 10 years each. I see. Six long service studs, 10 years each, so about 60 years. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, so I think my summary here is that there were things in this book that I struggled with. There's nothing outright terrible, but the coolest stuff for me, the things I enjoyed the most, were all relatively brief. The coolest world building, the coolest characters, all that kind of stuff, they were outweighed a little bit by just the drudgery. I wouldn't say it was bad, and maybe drudgery is too strong a word, but I struggled a little bit just to read it, because I felt as lost as the characters are at times. So it just wasn't as exciting as I think I needed it to be. And I think when we get to, the big finish, the Eldar, it kind of felt disconnected to everything that had come before it. It felt kind of arbitrary. It felt like we're getting a load of Eldar now because the book's called Harlequin, and I guess that's what we're supposed to get. Now, that could change with Chaos Child. There's a lot of setup. Even though this is the second part of a trilogy, there's loads more setup here with regards to prophecies, with regards to Zephyr Carnelian and what Jack is all about. Melindy has died at the end of this book, so there's a standing question about that. We fully set up that there is supposed to be some sort of time travel thing in the webway. So, Chekhov's webway is in play, I would imagine. It could be that Melindy is not so dead after all, or it will be undead again in the future. Anvil, good news, Jordan. The first two chapters of Chaos Child feel exactly like Harlequin. I haven't read more than that yet. Yeah, I'm going to guess it continues in much the same vein, to be honest. Zingbo, I remember enjoying Inquisitor more than its sequels, though that may well have been introduced by a big time gap between me reading them. I'm willing to bet, Zingbo, that it is not just because of the time gap. Like, for me, even though I don't think Inquisitor was flawless either, I think Inquisitor was stronger than this book, mostly because it just flowed better. Like, Inquisitor kind of has the same problems with, like, you know, certain excesses and certain, like, executions that aren't quite, like, that don't land always, but it kind of feels like it's got more, like, propulsive narrative and a bit more momentum than this book had. Inquisitor is probably less integrated into the rest of 40k IP than the other ones. Its core Ordo Hydra thing is a completely original creation, while the sequels pull in more established lore. Yeah, I mean, there are interesting aspects to that. I don't know. I think so far across the Ian Watson material, I find it very interesting because there are moments in it that are just, like, really good, that have, like, incredible world building. Like, so in Space Marine, I loved the stuff with Necromunda and, like, just getting the gangs and the sort of the interactions between those different gangs. I thought that was great. I think there was some really cool stuff there. Tarek Z's and the Churgeon Dreadnought, I think, is awesome. I hope we see him again. I think it's really cool. If we don't see him again, you can be sure I'm going to be using that character in an RPG adventure at some point because I think it's ace. So, like, there's cool stuff. I mean, what you're saying there, Anvil, I think when I finished Harlequin, I wrote on Discord that I thought the highs were less high and the lows less low in Harlequin compared to Inquisitor. I would probably agree, but I feel like there are more, maybe not lows, but there are more, like, failings in Harlequin than Inquisitor for me. So although the depths of the failures are much, much lower at times in Inquisitor, there's just, like, more of them here. And that's the muddiness. Like, it becomes really muddy to try and get through a lot of it. And Richard, you're saying it gets weirder in Chaos Child. So, I mean, that's something to look forward to. Biggest thing about the new cam has me having opinions about Jordan's coaster, brackets positive, which is not something I expected to learn about myself. I really like these coasters. Yeah, I'm a big fan of these. Well, I mean, obviously because I've got them. But yeah, they were actually for a thingy set, like a Chinese teapot set. But I quite like them. They work quite nicely with. They're just the right width for you to put a glass on or a mug on, and it sits quite conveniently on there. So I think they were a lucky find. Anvil, whether or not that on balance is good, bad, or neutral, I'm not sure about. I think a little bad. So that's in reference to the high highs and low lows versus Inquisitor. Yeah, I think Zingbo. Yeah, I think maybe this book is a little bit more hamstrung by, like, the feeling, and it might not be the case. But there's a certain feeling here that is like, it feels to me like the design studio said, well, we've got Eldar miniatures coming out or just came out, or we've just written all this stuff about the Eldar in White Dwarf. You know, could you include that maybe? And then people might buy some more miniatures of those guys. There's like a feeling of, I don't want to say it's artificial. It just feels like they're there in order to be there rather than to sort of service the plot. So you get, like, Swooping Hawks and description of Swooping Hawks. They do nothing in this story. They're there because there are Eldar there, but we don't need to learn about the Swooping Hawks. We don't need for that to be a part of this story, but it is, and it takes you away for a couple of paragraphs for no reason other than, you know, Swooping Hawks are cool, I guess. And that happens a few times where it's just like we're told something about a thing for the sake of it, and it doesn't really add to the plot. And yeah, I don't think we had that problem in Inquisitor. Oh, one thing I did forget to mention was that the only time a Harlequin is in this book, they're really stupid. So the Harlequin who turns up and is kind of like going to arrest Melindy does and comes across Melindy and her quote unquote prisoners because she looks like an Eldar. They initially think she's an Eldar, and then with like one word from Melindy, like "How you doing?" this Harlequin just starts. The exposition dump is unreal. This Harlequin who's never met this Eldar before is literally just telling them everything about the plan, telling them about God, telling them about the new men, and all of this sort of stuff. It is wild. And then later on, Zephyr Carnelian turns up and he's like, "Be careful, Harlequin. That's not a real Eldar. That's an assassin." And the Harlequin's like, "Oh, I'm embarrassed now. I just told them all our secrets." So it's very strange. And then there is a duel, and one of the Eldar, I don't think it's a Harlequin, I think it's just like an Aspect Warrior steps up, or maybe a Eldar Banshee. But it doesn't. Yeah, it didn't play that well. It didn't play like the Harlequins are really cool and know what they're doing. It played like these guys aren't the sharpest tools in the toolbox either. So like I wasn't too keen on that. I would like if you're gonna call a book Harlequin, and you're gonna be like they're on the cover of the book, and the only time they do anything is just accidentally reveal the entire plot in 2 minutes and then leave. I don't know. It feels a bit arbitrary to me. Like, why is this book? I'd love to know what you guys think. Why is this book called Harlequin? Like, to what end? Other than it being a cool word and the cover art being amazing. Why is Harlequin or the Harlequins? Why are they any more relevant to the title of this book than anything else in this book? And I don't think there's an answer to that, because I don't think they are. I think they literally are just a thing plucked from the 40k universe to be the title for the sake of it, because, you know, why not? So, yeah. That's not a damning indictment, but it is like, it does kind of speak to the sort of slight artificiality of some of this book, if that makes sense. But in any case, I do not regret reading it. I do think there's some cool stuff in here. I think there's some very inspirational stuff. And I think this is what Watson does. And everything I've read of Watson so far is like, I feel like he has a good handle on the universe. And he's really good with like the sort of seedier corners of the universe, the sleazy corners of the universe. I think with maybe a bit more editing and a bit sterner hand from like an editorial team who were like, who, you know, that there was something more meaningful. Like they could have maybe another editing pass could have like elevated these books to be something a bit stronger. Maybe, I don't know. Slug, why was Chinatown called Chinatown? I feel like it's been a long time since I watched Chinatown, but I feel like there's a line of dialogue about Chinatown in the movie, right? They specifically say something about how things go down in Chinatown. Like, so it's relevant on the I think, and again, I'm gonna have to go and double check, but I think it was relevant like for that one bit of information. I'm gonna have to search now. Anvil, I think the Harlequins are brought up a lot, even though they don't appear on screen very much. But yeah, I think it's somewhat tenuous. Yeah, maybe, but yeah. And you know, you refer to them like doing exercises and stuff, but even then, they're never sort of brought up in a way. Like they're not. You could have called this book Sensei, and it would have made more sense. You could have called this book Hydra, and it probably would have made more sense. You could have called it Eldar, and it would have made more sense. Harlequin, singular, sort of, and I think you're saying this, Zingbo. Ian Watson might have intended it to refer to the Harlequin man, but then someone at GW decided to stick Eldar Harlequin art on the cover. Entirely possible. Even then, I mean, you kind of loop back around to my issue with the Harlequin man that I raised before. I don't know. The whole thing seems a bit tenuous, a little bit of a house of cards built on sand, because it doesn't quite fit together. Like, you kind of the cover of the book and the name of the book promises me a story that's going to feature the Harlequins, as in, if not a lot, but at least in a pivotal way, which I don't believe it does. It's not even Harlequins who kill Melindy. It's not Harlequins who slow down like the progression through the webway. That's all like that's the aspect warriors and the exarchs and stuff. So you kind of don't like. It sort of doesn't. It doesn't achieve. It doesn't do anything there. So I don't know why. Anvil, like how only great Harlequins are supposed to know where to find one or more special places in the webway and such. I got the impression from the book that the Harlequins are weirdly important in Eldar society in a way I didn't think beforehand. Yeah, and I think that aspect of the Harlequins as this kind of strange growth on the side of Eldar society is really interesting. One of the coolest things about the Harlequins, and is not always accepted. Like, the Harlequins, for me, they are weird to the Eldar. Like, they're not just, oh, there's some Harlequins walking down the street. They're very strange and they're very different, even to the Eldar. That's how I kind of see them. But that might be just me. So look, there is a line about Chinatown, but it's just that one line. We never go to Chinatown. Well, there you go, though. Like, that still, at least to me, makes more sense, because that's saying that the film is called Chinatown because it's about somewhere you do not go. And Jake goes. Is his name Jake? Whoever he's playing, Jack Nicholson, goes to the place he should not go in the movie. He goes to the metaphorical Chinatown. So it does make sense to me. I don't think that Jack goes to the metaphorical Harlequin in this book. Anvil, look, Harlequin is better justified as a title than Warblade was, so there. Fair enough. Yeah, because that should have been Warpblade, I think, because that's what they called the actual weapon. Slug, what was GW's Harlequin release schedule at the time of this book's release? Maybe that's the real answer. Quite possible. I mean, I think this book came out several years after the Harlequin box set had come out. I mean, this is 94, yeah. So this is like 6 years later. So the Harlequins had been around for a good long time. I don't know if they were updated. Maybe there were some additional models released. I'm not sure. I think did I just see something in the chat that sparked a thought, but now it's eluding me. It was about the murders. It was about the murders, the Inquisitors being murdered. Did we get a resolution for that before I wrap up? Can anyone remember? Is there a resolution to who is killing the Inquisitors? Is it just Baal Ferenz killing the Inquisitors, or is it somebody else? Or is that going to be part of the Chaos Child? I will say, I mean, it's not the opening line, but Inquisitors are being murdered is a strong early line. There's another line that I wrote down that I thought was excellent, which was, if you must lie, let the lie be so amazing that no one can doubt it. And I will agree. I think that is a very cool line. There's actually a few very cool lines. I took some photos. I'm just going to see if I can quickly find any more of them. I meant to write them down, but I don't think I did. There was some. I think it's very funny that Ian Watson continues to refer to Imperial Fists as having puss-coloured armor, which I think is funny. No, I don't know. I'm not sure which lines I was going to. Oh yeah, there was some interesting stuff about like the fall of a planet to Slaanesh, which I thought was quite good. So this is the planet they go to where they find Grimm and they find Azul Petrov, the navigator. Signs of laxity were everywhere in the continuing beautification of the cities with mosaics and fountains, in charity towards beggars, in the peace and prosperity of the planet, in regulations for the benevolent conduct of brothels, in the ever-rising standard of cuisine, in the abolition of laws allowing the torture of suspects, even in the pronunciation of the local dialect of Imperial Gothic. I really like that as a way of explaining how something can fall from the Imperium to chaos. And that's because the Imperium is so strict and so without luxury that having parks and fountains is a luxury that invites Slaanesh. Now, obviously there's plenty to argue about whether the Imperium is a necessary evil or not, but I just quite like the subtlety of some of these things. I think all too often, and Ian Watson is guilty of this as well, all too often Slaanesh and worship of Slaanesh takes the form of very sexual sort of deviant behavior, whereas actually there's loads of other aspects of Slaanesh that would also speak to that corruption and the ever rising standard of cuisine and the way that language was being pronounced. I think that they are so good and subtle, and the potential for them to be elements of chaos is such an interesting, subtle thing. That, yeah, these are the things that I really like that Watson does. And there's loads of them. They're scattered around, but they're normally a line here, a paragraph there, an idea over here. So there's a lot of stuff like that kind of gets lost in the mix when I talk more broadly about the work. But I do respect and think there are a lot of really interesting elements of those things. So yeah, it lacks a certain, I don't know, narrative oomph for me, this book. But not a bad book, an interesting book certainly, one that presents the 40k universe in an interesting way, and one that leaves me with a lot of interest, at least enough interest, I suppose, not a lot, but enough interest to finish Chaos Child. So this is coming up next. We're going to be doing this one over the next month, and then we'll be sitting down for the final box tree GW Book Club live stream at the start of June. It will be, so it's going to be post UK Games Expo. Going to get on live stream. We're going to talk about Chaos Child. We're going to wrap up the Inquisitor trilogy. We're going to wrap up the box tree line of GW books. That will be the whole lot done. The GW Book Club will have completed the original fiction line, which is very exciting. After that, we're going to take a look at some stuff beyond GW. So the books that have inspired Games Workshop, as well as some other select Games Workshop library releases as well, I think. So that's the kind of direction we're going in. So Chaos Child will be next, coming up in about a month. I was also going to mention, if you're interested in getting hold of a copy of Dystopian Wars, check out patreon.com/Jordan Sorcery, where you can enter for free. You just have to sign up to Patreon, which you can do for free. You get a free membership. And then you can enter the competition and you could win a full copy of the 2-player starter set, Dominion of the Dragon, for Dystopian Wars. That's there right now. There's also articles and exclusive interviews and lots of other material only available to patrons. I've recently started doing some game book live plays where I'm playing through game books like Fighting Fantasy stuff and recording an hour of playtime and seeing how far I get and whether I can complete it or whether I die or whether I leave off with treasures in abundance. There's loads of other stuff as well. I think I'm going to do some reviews. I might sit down. I'm not sure. I might try and write my thoughts about Harlequin so they're a bit more eloquent and concise than I've just rambled through. We'll see. I'm not sure, but I might do that. And I will share that on Patreon as well. I'm halfway through a review of Board of the Rings, the the Harvard Lampoon satire of J.R.R. Tolkien, I've been writing that for ages, just not put the finishing touches. But I'm hoping I'll be able to share that soon as well on the Patreon. There's loads of other stuff there as well. But for now, folks, I'm gonna wrap up. I'm gonna thank you all for joining me as ever. Lots of really interesting insights and questions in the chat. Thank you very much for taking part. It really helps me sort of, talk through my thoughts. And a lot of the time, they're the beginnings of thoughts. I'm sure I will sit with this book and with the others and ruminate on them. I mentioned early on, I mentioned that I quite like the idea that Jack and Belinda, this sort of broken love story. I think there's more I'd like to dwell on with regard to that and to think about that. And there are other things, like the treatment of Grimm and how that represents the Imperium's like xenophobia and purity and this kind of the dark side of the Imperium. I think that things like that are quite good. These characters are more complex and there's lots of interesting things happening to them. So overall, an interesting read, a tough read at times for me. Didn't flow as well as Inquisitor, but I'm glad I've read it. And yeah, we'll see what Chaos Child brings, and we'll see if it all comes together in an interesting way at the end. But for now, folks, thank you very much for joining me. And until next time, I'm Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery. Cheers.